welcome everyone to the first episode of the Better Science Show. My name is Fabio Brazil da Costa.
And I'm Saleh Ramazani.
And as part of our Science Digest series, today our first episode is going to be about sleep. So, Saleh, how many hours roughly of sleep do you get a night?
Well, Fabio, I don't really keep track of how long I sleep, but I think I sleep about 5 to 6 hours a night, or I try to keep that as a benchmark.
Yeah, man, I could never sleep that much. Like if I s- ever, s- if, I mean, if I sleep less than 7 hours, I'm like a zombie the next day. So I need at least 7 hours.
Yeah, Fabio, sleep is very important, and you hear reports of people either sleeping too much or too little, especially during the pandemic with the culture of work from home. And I was really excited when we decided to talk about sleep in this episode. And the study that we have chosen for today looks at the association of sleep duration in the middle age and old age with incidence of dementia. This study was published just a couple of months ago in the Journal of Nature Communication, and it was a collaborative effort between scientists from United Kingdom, France, Netherlands, and Finland.
Yeah, and so for those of you that didn't watch our introductory episode, one of the things that we will do in this series is also show how the media has portrayed some of these studies. And in fact, the media has picked up on this particular study, and you can see here some of the major news outlets saying that if you contrast the title of the study, which Saleh just read to you, they found an association of sleep duration with the increased risk. And then you have CNN here saying sleeping less than 6 hours a night increases the risk of dementia by 30%. And that is not necessarily what the study is saying, you know. And you have other news outlets here like The Guardian, The New York Times, even Fox News. And they're kind of talking about it in the same way, but in reality, it's way more nuanced than that. So, Salah, tell us a little bit about the study highlights.
Yeah, Fabio. So this study analyzed the sleep data that was collected over the span of 30 years from over 8,000 participants. And in analyzing this data, they looked at a lot of variables, including the participants' age, gender, diet, their alcohol drinking habit, and a lot of other variables that we're going to get into. And in a nutshell, what they found was that sleep durations of less than 6 hours are associated with increased risk of developing dementia.
Right. And so, yeah, looking into this association of sleep duration or even sleep in general and later development of neurological issues is a topic of active research. And but in this field, there were a few gaps in the knowledge, which this particular study that we're talking about today helped uh, provide more data on. So right now, the majority of the studies in the field, they have a short period of follow-up where they look at the patients. So the study that we're talking about today had the ability to look at over 30 years of data, but most studies right now only have the ability to look at 10 years of data. Some of the studies already published right now only look at a smaller number of participants, maybe in the hundreds or 1,000 or so. The study we're talking about today did look at over 8,000 people. Sometimes the studies that we have available now also have looked at patients that are at advanced ages. And the problem with that is right now it's not so clear whether these issues associated with dementia are what causes dementia or if dementia causes some of these issues like sleep. Is dementia impacting sleep or is sleep that is causing dementia, right?
Right.
So when the patient is already advanced ages, it's possible that some of those dementia features are already manifesting, which is impacting sleep. So you have to look at them, you have to look at participants that are younger because dementia has a preclinical uh, uh, duration, let's say, where the disease is developing, that it can be over 20 years. The other important thing is that in many studies, the mental health of the participant is usually not is overlooked, and we know that mental health, like issues as depression and anxiety, can have an impact on sleep and other uh, parts of our life. So we need to understand better if mental health is something that is important. And these shortcomings from other studies were something that were considered in the study that we'll talk about today. So Saleh will tell us a little bit about how this particular study was done.
Yeah, so Fabio, to understand how this study was conducted, we have to reference another study that started back in 1985, the Whitehall study. The goal of this study was to investigate the occupational and social influences on health of the participants. Now, the participants in this study at the time of enrollment were between the ages of 35 and 50 years old. They were mostly men, about 67% of them were men, and 33% were women. And the study collected a lot of data, including the sleep habits of the participants. And you might wonder, how did they collect the sleep information? Well, back in the day, there was no smartwatch to record your sleep, so they just did a questionnaire. They would ask, how many hours of sleep do you get on an average on a weeknight, on average on a weeknight.
Mhm.
And so that was the 1985 Whitehall study. The 2021 study that was just published a couple of months ago took the data from this Whitehall study and ran a bunch of mathematical equations and the statistics and looked at a lot of variables such as sex, marital status, ethnicity, education, alcohol drinking, and smoking, and a lot of other variables, and how they impacted the sleep of these participants. They grouped these participants into three groups at the ages of 50, 60, and 70 years old. And towards the end of this study, they in the year 2013, when smartwatches were available, or actually they used an accelerometer, they did a more objective assessment of sleep duration. They had the participants wear these accelerometers for 7 days and compared that data with the questionnaire data that they had.
Exactly. And the just as an addendum here, they classified the duration of sleep for these participants as in if they slept for 7 hours on average a weeknight, that was considered normal. If they slept for 6 hours or less, that was considered short sleep. If they slept for 8 hours or more, that was considered long sleep. So what they found with this study,
it was that basically 521 participants out of 7,959 developed dementia. That's about 6.5%.
yeah. And when we actually look into these 521 participants that develop dementia, and we break them down as in those groups of short, normal, of long or long sleep duration, this is kind of what we start getting. So we see that about out of those almost 8,000 participants, 3,600 of them roughly had what they considered a normal sleep, 7 hours. About 1,200 were the ones that slept for 8 hours or more, and about 3,100 were the ones that slept for 6 hours or less. Now, what we're really interested is looking, okay, into each one of these groups, how many of them develop dementia? And now just to make an observation here, these numbers are from the patients when they were at age 50 on average. They did have this data for when they were at age 60 and 70, but the authors of the study claim that it was similar. So here we're just showing the ones for age 50. So when we look at this, we see that for the patients, for the participants, sorry, that slept for about 7 hours a night, about 219 of them, or 6.04%, developed dementia. The ones that slept for 8 hours or more were 91, which was about 7.67% of the original group. And the ones that slept for 6 hours or less, about 211 participants developed dementia, which was about 6.7% of that group. Now, if you look at these differences, you can really start to wonder. They're very small, they're very similar, like 6.04 for the people that slept 7 hours or more, or I mean, around 7 hours, and then 6.7% for the participants that slept for 6 hours or less. So that's a very small difference. And it goes back to what Saleh was saying. When you run all of those statistics analysis and the mathematical equations, you actually can get to a number, which is a number that you saw probably in the headlines and things like that. They say, oh, if you sleep for less than 6 hours a night, you have a 30% increased risk of dementia.
Yeah, Fabio, what's interesting here is the participants who slept more than 7 hours. You can see that
The 8 hours or more, right?
right, 8 hours or more. You can see that even a higher percentage of those participants develop dementia, but they are at a less risk than the ones who
Yeah,
had a short sleep.
and that's a great point, Saleh, because so here what we're seeing is that the authors claim that there is a 30% increased risk for the people that sleep 6 hours or less. But when you look at the people that sleep the 8 hours or more, that's 28% increased risk. Now, what the authors say is that when they run the statistical analysis and those equations, the statistical significance is not there for the people that sleep 8 hours or more, but it is there for the sleep for the patient participants that sleep 6 hours or less, although it's barely significant. So when we look at, there's in statistics, there's this magical number we call the p-value that tells the scientists whether that result is statistically significant or not. And this 30% increased risk here was barely significant. So at this point, we can always talk about, like, is this a numbers game? Like, we need more statistical
Right.
power in this. But
Yeah, Fabio, despite the statistical significance of this study being barely significant, this study was powerful in that they had access to an abundance source of information from the Whitehall study, information that was collected from a large sample size of over 8,000 participants, and information that was collected over the course of 30 years. It's uncommon to have access to such a large data set. And given that they have access to this information, they did a wonderful job with their in-depth assessment of sleep data. They looked at a lot of variables such as the marital status of participants, the exercise, alcohol drinking, and smoking habits, diet. Yeah. They even, what's really interesting about the study is that they looked at how mental health of participants impacted the sleep duration. And I think it's a very powerful analysis.
Yeah. Mental health is deeply linked with neurological issues. So it's something that other studies in the area had not even considered that much. But they had that data for this set of participants, for this data set, and they were able to use those complicated mathematical equations and statistical analysis to see if those had an impact or a relationship with the sleep duration.
Right.
So the thing also about the study is it does have some weaknesses, which we have to highlight. This study was based, most of their analysis were based off of the data available from this other study, the Whitehall study. So for them, one of the things that I would say first is that in this study, there was no information about the quality of sleep. So that is actually very, very important. So looking at sleep duration, how many of you have slept for 10 hours or 8 hours sometimes, and you wake up and you feel super tired, right? So quality of sleep, how long you're spending each one of those cycles, like REM cycle, whatnot. There are many cycles of sleep, and quality of sleep is very important, not just duration. So that was something that was completely absent from this, and it's not a fault of the researchers of the study. That information was just not available.
Right.
So the other thing that is important is that despite having that treasure of data for each one of these participants, they are still not able to establish a link or a causation. So you have almost like a chicken and the egg problem. Is it sleep that causes dementia, or is it dementia that causes problems sleeping? So this, they looked at data from patients that were 50, 60, 70 years old during this long follow-up of 30 years, but they were still not able to establish that relationship of causation. Uh, as we mentioned before, the statistical significance is something that we can maybe say it's a weakness, because not in the sense that they didn't do proper statistics. I'm sure like this is a statistics heavy
Right.
paper. I'm sure they're very competent scientists at doing this, but it's just that at the end of the day, the statistical analysis turned out to be just barely significant. So I think that with more studies like this in the future, we can see more data and have more confirmations about what they found here. The other thing that we have to look into consideration as well, and we mentioned this briefly in the beginning, is that this data was self-reported. So we know that when a patient tells information about something that they're experiencing, that it's notoriously
Right.
like you can get some inaccurate information from that. And the majority of the data from this study was collected in that manner. Like also Salah mentioned, the collection of the data through the accelerometer device was a positive of the study, but it was in a way also a weakness, because that only was looked at for 7 days. So they had a subset of these participants. It was not even all of them. It was a subset of them, and they looked at 7 days of data. And they said, okay, so 7 days of data was consistent with all the rest of the data. So they're like, okay, we can trust all of the rest. But that one's a hard pill to swallow.
Right.
And then lastly, I would say that the participant diversity is something that we have to keep in mind, because the data available was a data that was collected from a subset of people at that time, that, for example, 90% of these participants were white. You had 2/3 of them were men. And then when you look at these...
And lived in the United Kingdom only.
And exactly, like all of them live in the United Kingdom. So there's something that is not discussed at all, is that, okay, so how does this really play a role with like other demographics? Like if they had done this study in Japan or in somewhere in Africa or in Latin America, how would that be different, right? So that's something that is not even discussed at all. So I think that with that, we can move to our takeaways.
Right. Yeah, Fabi, I think that overall, this study is a very good contribution to sleep and dementia field of research. What do you think?
I agree. I think that it's a very unique paper, and with all of the strengths that we discussed, there's a lot of information on the participants. I think it's an extremely valuable contribution, but we still cannot establish a cause and effect.
Right.
And what that means essentially for us is that there needs to be more research, right?
Right. Yeah, we know sleep is very important, however, and I think that it's important to get a good night of sleep and wake up sharp. And hopefully, with more studies that come out, we can have a better answer to if there is an association between sleep and mental health.
And props to the authors of this study, because they were very careful, they were very thorough by even bringing up their own limitations. And this is what science is all about. At the end of the day, they said, look, we found an association, but more studies are necessary. We need more information about this. And this is what science is all about. The other thing that is important to say, that we didn't have much time here to say, but it is that other studies that also look into these same factors have found slightly different results. So in this particular study, the authors didn't really find a statistical significance when they looked at the people that slept for more than 8 hours. But other studies done in other areas of the world have actually found that. But those studies have their own limitations. So it's hard to tell without looking at it from a more comprehensive point of view. So this alters to say that science is something that evolves in a way. Sometimes it evolves slowly. It evolves through other scientists looking at the other data from the data from others and being able to maybe replicate that data and being able to really put everything together. So sometimes it moves slowly. It's if you see a scientist saying like this is the absolute truth, be careful when you hear that.
Right. Yeah, I think, Fabio, that concludes our first episode. Thank you for watching us, and we're going to post a link to download these slides at the bottom of this video. Let us know what you think. We welcome your suggestions and a healthy, clean debate. If you have any points that you want to make about this study, please do so.
Yeah, we also are going to post a link for the paper if somebody is interested in reading.
Sure.
And you can always email us. We will have the link of the email address for us, like if you want to send suggestions, like Saleh said. And I hope everyone enjoyed this, and we can't wait to put out a next episode. So,
Right. Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Everyone,
you.
have a good day.
Have a good one.